Cam Ward just shared his first impressions of the University of Miami, and I'm starting to get a pretty good idea as to what Miami's new starting quarterback is all about.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I am Alex Donno. I'm a University of Miami alumnus, longtime South Florida sports radio vet, and contributor to allhurricanes.com. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch. We're free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. The Cam Ward era is getting started at Miami. We're also apparently getting started on the Chevis Jackson era, coaching defensive backs. We'll talk about him in a little bit, but this was really cool. Cam Ward had his first opportunity to meet Miami Hurricanes fans over the weekend. Shout out to Harry and everybody at the Miami Hurricanes team store for hosting Ward for an autograph signing this past Saturday. And everybody that I spoke to, fans who came down for the event, were absolutely blown away, and they're really impressed by Miami's new starting quarterback. One guy who came, he said he drove 5 hours from Tampa just to come down and meet Cam Ward. Had an awesome experience down here, him and his family. And definitely, it's really important, I think, to have this opportunity. There's a lot of videos out there because Cam did do some media availability and talk to some reporters out there. I'm pleasantly, I'm not going to say surprised, but I get pleasant impressions on what Cam Ward is all about, because I know that just based on the whole process, you had that whole saga of, is he going to Miami? Is he going to Florida State? Is he going to the NFL? And the thing dragged on for so long. I know that some people out there got this impression that, hey, maybe this guy's a little bit of a diva and maybe this guy is quote unquote Hollywood. I don't get that impression whatsoever from Cam Ward, which is very pleasant, because you want somebody here who's all about the work, and he seems to be that. Because the big thing that stands out about me personality-wise, we're going to see it on the field, hopefully spring football and beyond, but Cam does not give out any Hollywood vibes whatsoever. He comes off as a totally humble and hardworking guy. And I know for a fact he spends a lot of time, if not most of his time, at the Hurricanes team facility working out. And he also mentioned he does spend some time fishing. And if you're an angler, if you're a fisherman, South Florida is not a bad place to be. So once he's done putting in his work at the Hurricanes team facility, off-season workouts, he likes to go out and fish on some afternoons as well. He said he recently got his living situation settled down here, which is obviously important. He's starting to feel comfortable in the area. He shouted out some of his teammates. He spoke very highly of Xavier Restrepo, and what he said about X, or Strep, as some people call him. That always makes me think of strep throat, but Strep, one of the things that Ward said about Restrepo, which is not surprising, because I feel like Xavier Restrepo is one of the most not only important players on the Miami Hurricanes, but one of the most important team leaders. Restrepo was the first guy who reached out to Ward to get to know him, even before Ward got to campus, right? Like when it was reported he's coming to Miami, Xavier Restrepo basically immediately was in Ward's inbox. They were chatting. And, you guys remember the very first day that Ward was on campus, he and Restrepo met up and they took some pictures together. So Restrepo's been working on that chemistry with Ward on and off the field. And Ward is putting in that work as well. He talked about how at this point, first few weeks at the facility, he's been trying to learn everybody's names. All of it, you got 84 teammates just for the scholarship guys, then all the walk-ons. He's learning everybody's names, getting acclimated and familiar with everyone. And he spoke really highly, not only of Restrepo, but also of Jacolby George. We've seen those reports that he and George are building really good chemistry and workouts. He shouted out some of his offensive linemen. Anez Cooper is someone he singled out as being a really hard worker, and Jalen Rivers. He talked about Ruben Bain and some of Miami's defensive players. Now, he didn't say it at the autograph signing availability, but you guys remember we showed you that video last week. that Ward did for the Canes Connection NIL Collective, and he also talked about Josiah Trader, true freshman receiver, as someone who's really been standing out to him in workouts, and the two of them are building some chemistry. So I get the impression with Ward, not only is this guy, he's about the work and he's very humble, doesn't give off any diva vibes whatsoever. He seems to be really putting in a concerted and effort to be a professional and really hit the ground running, because he's got a lot at stake here at Miami, right? You talk about players with a lot to prove. Ward is not only trying to actually win something meaningful before he finishes his college career, because obviously the Washington State team that he played on last season, not really his fault, but it wasn't a very good team around him. So he wants to try and compete for ACC championships and maybe even something bigger beyond that, during his year at Miami. And he's also trying to raise his NFL draft stock, because if he was confident that he would have been, let's say, a first or a second rounder, probably would have stuck with the NFL draft declaration, but he didn't feel he was being evaluated as highly as he should be in his mind. So he comes here with something to prove. He wants to be a first-round NFL draft pick next year. So there's a lot at stake, team goals and individual goals for Cam Ward. And I get good vibes off of him so far. Now, Miami reportedly, I don't think the deal has been signed just yet, but everything is pointing to Chevis Jackson. Welcome to the U. That Chevis Jackson is going to become the new defensive backs coach at Miami. He's going to be the guy that replaces Jamil Adai. Now, Jackson, he has worked before with and under Miami's defensive coordinator, Lance Guidry. Things worked out well the last time these guys were together, 2022 at Marshall. That was the year that Marshall pulled off that impressive upset against Notre Dame, and they had one of the top defenses in the country that year. They finished 9th nationally in interceptions that year, which is important because that's the unit he coaches, and 3rd in pass efficiency defense. They had the number 1 third down defense in the country that season at Marshall, and they finished 5th in yards per play. Now, I think that, guys, with this reported hire of Chevis Jackson, who is the associate defensive coordinator and cornerbacks coach for the Marshall Thundering Herd, he's reportedly headed to the U. I think it's really important here that Lance Guidry clearly had influence in this hire, because this is a coach that's going to be working closely with him and reporting to him. I'm glad that Mario Cristobal apparently gave Guidry some autonomy in figuring out someone who he's comfortable working with. It's also our understanding that Evan Cooper, who's at Nebraska, had a really good interview for this job, and it may have come down to Jackson versus Cooper. But if Cooper is the guy that Guidry and ultimately Cristobal felt most comfortable hiring, I'm glad that they got their guy. And I'm sure that, and we're going to talk more about Chevis Jackson's potential impact here, but that anytime you join a Mario Cristobal staff during an offseason, your first priority becomes recruiting, second priority, recruiting, third priority, recruiting. So I'm sure Chevis Jackson is already working hard on building relationships with important defensive back recruits like DJ Pickett, the 5-star out of Zephyr Hills, and Chris Ewald, the 4-star out of Chaminade Madonna. And it's funny how we've seen, the coaching staff. Hopefully they're finding the right dynamics. Now, obviously the 2023 staff worked out a lot better than the 2022 staff, which was kind of a disaster. The only assistant coaches to this point who were on the day one Cristobal staff at Miami, the only 2 guys left were Alex Mirabal, who obviously he pulls his weight even more so than literally, because he's a very light looking guy, but Alex Mirabal is a stud offensive line coach, and Big Joe Salavea on the defensive line. Those are the only 2 day one assistant coaches that remain on Mario Cristobal's staff. Obviously, we loved what Lance Guidry did last season. The jury's still a little bit out on Shannon Dawson, but Dawson was a big upgrade statistically over Josh Gaddis the year prior. And hopefully these moves that Miami is making, from Matt Merritt, the running backs coach, to now Chevis Jackson, that these hires end up working out. And even if your staff is not as high profile and, as I'll use the word again, Hollywood as it used to be, it's about that chemistry and it's about that hard work. Folks, we're going to be answering you guys' questions on this episode as well. The Locked On Canes insiders have been going wild since I apologize for being out of town for 3 days. Hopefully you missed the show. I miss doing the show when I'm not around, but yeah, I have way too much respect for Abe Lincoln and George Washington to work on President's Day. So here we are on this post-President's Day Tuesday. I want to talk about Miami transfer edge rusher Elijah Alston. Elijah Alston is getting national praise and accolades through the roof. You want to keep it locked right here on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. And I know you're keeping it locked to FanDuel because we're winning money and we're loving it. You can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props. Guys, I love my player props with Bam and Jimmy and Jaime Jaquez. I hope you guys had a good and productive all-star weekend on FanDuel because there were a lot of props as well. There's so much more you can get when it comes to the NBA action. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Thank you so much for making this Tuesday episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports today. This network has launched the first ever 24/7 streaming sports YouTube channel. National experts and local experts like myself are always breaking down the big stories at Locked On Sports Today. Again, it's streaming 24/7, so it is always there for you. Check out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. Elijah Alston. This is a Miami Hurricanes addition through the transfer portal and another Marshall connection, right? Miami got Lance Guidry last year, who performed very well as defensive coordinator. He had just been at Marshall. Miami now hires Marshall's defensive backs coach. Reportedly, Chevis Jackson is coming to Miami, and Miami has already brought in a transfer portal edge rusher from, you guessed it, Marshall, and that's Elijah Alston. Let me tell you something, guys. He could end up being one of those kind of lower key transfer portal additions. You know, he doesn't get talked about the way that Cam Ward gets talked about, obviously, but I'll tell you who loves Elijah Alston. Pro Football Focus and their metrics adore Elijah Alston. He has been ranked, according to PFF College, #1 transfer edge rusher in the entire transfer portal class with an elite 91.4 grade. He graded out higher than other top transfer edges like Texas's Trey Moore, Ole Miss's Princely, if I try to pronounce his last name, Umanalian, and Texas A&M's Eric Scorton, just to name a few. He grades out higher than all these guys who came from high-profile schools and went to other high-profile schools. Here are the stats that Elijah Alston put up this past season at Marshall. 45 tackles, 16 quarterback hurries, 11.5 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 1 interception, and 1 touchdown. So again, this guy has been graded by Pro Football Focus as the #1 transfer edge rusher in the entire country. So it makes me wonder, folks, because Miami in recent years, you think about a guy like Jaelan Phillips, very successful transfer edge rusher, right? You think about, the type of impact years ago that Greg Rousseau had at Miami. Maybe Elijah Alston can be a #1 of these impact guys. And we got a question I'm going to answer a little bit later on as to who I think the 4 starters are going to be on Miami's defensive line. You've got some really tough questions to ask in that department because, there are certain guys who I think are not, well, maybe at least one guy who I think is non-negotiable, who's going to be a starter on that defensive line for sure next season. You've got a lot of other hungry individuals, especially on the edges, that are going to be competing for playing time and starting jobs. And, what we always say, iron sharpens iron. Competition makes everyone better. Miami's going to have some competition on the D-line, especially at the edge rusher spots. And a guy like Elijah Alston is going to feature prominently in that group. I think he's going to end up being a really great signing here at the University of Miami. All right, let's answer some questions here. We get a question from Law grad. By the way, congratulations on your degree. That's not an easy thing. I barely made it through undergrad, and you've got a law degree at Miami. That is an impressive accomplishment. When are we going to get word about spring practices? Who's looking good, etc.? I forgot when they even started. Well, spring practices are starting in under 2 weeks now, guys. March 4th is going to be the first spring practice. You know, I'm going to be there with bells on. I'm going to be out there first spring practice talking hopefully to Cam Ward. I'm sure we'll be talking with Mario Cristobal. We'll get to watch some of the action out there. And yeah, I'm going to be reporting every day that I'm allowed out there. I'm going to be reporting on who's looking good and what's happening at spring practice. So you're going to get it on this show, Locked On Canes, starting March 4th. And you're also going to get it at the website that I write for, allhurricanes.com. And the spring game is going to be on April 13th. So March 4th is when the first practice starts. April 13th is when the spring game happens. And it's going to be an incredible journey during that entire time. Get a question from our guy, D-Lane, who says, he says, hey, hopefully you had a good break. I did have a good break, Delane. Although, like I said, I do miss doing the shows. Because I know this is my job, but it doesn't feel like work to me. So when I miss Locked On Canes episodes, if I'm not here to do weekend episodes or Monday it hurts me a little bit, but I'm happy to be back. He says, what kind of an effect do you think the hiring of Coach Chevis Jackson will have? Okay, so we talked about where Jackson came from. He worked at Marshall, was their associate defensive coordinator and cornerbacks coach, worked under Lance Guidry there in 2022. I think Chevis Jackson, a couple reasons why he's going to be intriguing to recruits. He won a national championship when he played at LSU under Les Miles. He was an all SEC selection at LSU. He was a third-round NFL draft pick. So this guy got to the league. That's always intriguing to recruits. He's from the state of Alabama, and he also has ties to Louisiana, and those are two very important recruiting areas for Coach Cristobal, because in case you haven't noticed, over these last couple of cycles, Miami has been in it for and landed a lot of recruits from Alabama, in it for and landed a lot of recruits from Louisiana. You've got two Cajun coordinators, which helps in that regard. So that area of SEC country, Alabama, Louisiana, those are two areas that Chevis Jackson is very familiar with in terms of high schools and recruits there. So he's gonna check off some important boxes in recruiting. Chevis has coached players who have had good college careers, who have gotten into the league. And, I think it's very, very important to note the chemistry that he already has with Lance Guidry. They have that working relationship. They have that shorthand and that rapport when it comes to working together in a defensive secondary. Because also, remember the way that Guidry does this, because Lance Guidry, he's a safeties coach by background. So, yes, he's the defensive coordinator, but I've watched practices before, and Lance Guidry spends a lot of hands-on, one-on-one time with the safeties. And when he was working with Jamil Adai, Jamil would work mostly with the corners and Guidry work mostly with the safeties. That's going to be, I would imagine, a similar dynamic to what he and Jackson are going to have. The Jackson's going to work mostly with the corners while Guidry works mostly with the safeties, and that's the way they're going to split up the work there. And yeah, the two of them, they worked together on one of the better defenses in the country a couple years ago at Marshall. I think Miami's going to be one of the best defenses in the country this year. We get a question from, this person didn't sign the question. I'm not sure who this was. Here's a question I've been pondering. The more that I hear about the Jimbo Fisher experience at Texas A&M, the more similarities I see with Mario Cristobal. I already don't like where this question is going, but I'll read it. He says, is it fair to say that we should have somewhat the same expectations from Mario being a great recruiter, but a mid-range game day coach? I always believe in UM. Just a thought I had and figured it might make a good talking point on the podcast. Well, such a good talking point that I'm going to answer it after these words. How can Mario Cristobal avoid becoming at Miami what Jimbo Fisher was at Texas A&M? Because Jimbo Fisher essentially was a very expensive mistake at Texas A&M. How can Mario Cristobal avoid becoming that? We'll answer that and so much more when we come back. Keep it locked. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. And I'm not done yet when it comes to LinkedIn jobs. I'm a firm believer in LinkedIn because I've gotten jobs through LinkedIn before. And if you're a small business owner, when you're hiring, you want to find quality professionals that are right for your role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many qualified candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for their hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch. We're free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hey, for the everydayers, if you want to take that everydayer experience to the next level, join our exclusive SMS texting service called Locked On Canes Insiders. Click the link in the show description below. You can try Locked On Canes Insiders free for 2 weeks. I give you guys recruiting scoops, one-on-one questions and answers. The questions we're answering on the episode today come from our Locked On Canes Insiders. Give you guys breaking news, all that good stuff. Text message directly from my phone to yours. Try it free for 14 days. And then if you like it, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. We give you a lot of added value there on Locked On Canes Insiders. So again, we're answering this question that says, hey, the more I hear about the Jimbo Fisher experience at A&M, the more similarities I see with Cristobal. Now, okay, so all right. First of all, I hope that Jimbo Fisher's fiasco of a tenure at Texas A&M, I hope that's a cautionary tale, not only to Mario Cristobal, but to anybody out there who signs a big contract to become a head coach somewhere. Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, okay? So I guess when you talk, and some of these similarities are kind of low-hanging fruit, because obviously, Jimbo Fisher had really successful recruiting classes at A&M. Mario's having successful recruiting classes at Miami. People talk a lot about Miami's NIL component, the same way people talked about Texas A&M's NIL. Even there, I think there's a little bit of a difference because from what I understand, obviously A&M was handing out, or at least promising, big-time NIL money. It didn't seem like they were that organized, though, with it. I think Miami already, I can tell you Miami's very organized with the way the Canes Connection Collective does things. And John Ruiz, all the rumors about Ruiz, the guy never missed a payment on anything. So Miami, even the NIL, I think is a little bit different. But some other things about Jimbo Fisher, where I hope Mario Cristobal's tenure works out differently, okay? My understanding about Jimbo in recent years is that he wasn't pleasant for players to be around, and that his stubbornness was an off-the-field thing as well. Because, I know Mario has this reputation for being stubborn schematically, right? For stubborn with his football mindset. But I don't think that translates to the off-the-field stuff. I think he relates very well to his players, and all of his players respect him. So I think there's a difference. Now, Jimbo Fisher, for whatever reason, he allowed Texas A&M's offensive line play to deteriorate under his watch. That certainly doesn't seem to be the case with what's happening on Mario's offensive line. Quite the opposite. That one's being built up. And here's something where obviously the jury is still out. Jimbo Fisher failed to adapt and evolve his offense. Obviously, the jury is out on Mario doing that. He's trying to be, more progressive with Shannon Dawson. Hopefully he lets Dawson do his thing. And, Cam Ward, just the quarterback play can make a huge difference this year. And listen, remember, no two coaches are the same. And even before Jimbo apparently burned out at Texas A&M, the guy did win a national championship at Florida State. And so as far as Cristobal, I think Mario Cristobal I compare him more to Butch Davis. I think he's more in the Butch Davis at Miami phase where he's building up a program. I don't think he's anywhere near that Jimbo Fisher phase where he's starting to burn out and check out the way Jimbo was over the last few years at Texas A&M. So I hope I did an okay job answering that question, but I'm not that's not really something I'm thinking about right now, but I appreciate the question anyway. We get a question from the original Cat 5 Kane, who says, Donno, who do you think will end up being the starting group on the defensive line this year? I like the idea of Elijah Alston, who we talked about, Ruben Bain, Nigel Kelly, and Jared Harrison Hunt. But he also adds, if Akeem Mesidor is healthy, he is probably in the top 4. I also like CJ Clark a lot, he says. We should have a really good 2 deep on the D line this year. Now, you nailed it with the 2 deep part, right? Because it's not really about who starts. It's about who gets into the game, how many snaps they get, and sometimes it's about riding the hot hand in games. Because when you have the blessing of depth that Miami seems to have on the defensive line, it's not really as much about who starts because there's going to be a heavy rotation there. I would say when I look at the names 2, 3 deep on Miami's defensive line, the one guy who screams to me, definitely a starter, non-negotiable, is Ruben Hurricane Bain. Like he's too special to keep off the field. He's going to start. He's going to play a lot. I think CJ Clark is most likely a starter in the interior, given his experience at NC State. Started every game there last year. Yeah, and he was handpicked as a veteran guy to join this defense. He was handpicked by Lance Guidry. I'd say Jared Harrison Hunt is very much in the running to start in the interior next to CJ Clark. So then, yeah, there's going to be a lot of questions between guys like Akeem Mesidor, who you mentioned, if he's fully healthy again. Elijah Alston, who's apparently the top graded transfer edge in the entire country. Nigel Kelly in as well. There's other names I'm not bringing up. I mean, guys who I think like Jaden Wayne is going to ascend and earn more playing time. All of these guys should be expected to play a lot. Now, maybe you're right about Mesidor becoming a starter, assuming he's fully healthy again, because he wasn't healthy basically all year last year. People forget how good Akeem Mesidor is. So you know what? Let's revisit this in a month and a half. Because once we get into the dog days of spring football, we're going to have a better idea who's trending to start. But I think the guy who's non-negotiable is Ruben Bain. That guy's going to be a starter, no question about it. And I think CJ Clark is probably going to end up being a starter as well. We get a question from Steve in Port Orange, Florida, who says, hey, in years past, the offseason hype out of Miami has led so many of us diehard fans to be over-optimistic, only to be let down during the season. I really believe Mario is making great strides towards bringing the U back, but I also believed Al Golden. I knew Mark Richt was going to do it, and with the yachts and all, Manny Diaz was the one, he thought. My question is, how do we get optimistically excited and not be disappointed? Well, first of all, it's all about where you set your own expectations. It sounds like you have enough self-awareness to know we've been let down enough times before. So I wouldn't go into any season unless Miami's already done it. Reese, I wouldn't go into any season at this point saying national title this year, definitely ACC championship, definitely college football playoff. Don't approach any season with that mindset until they've shown you they can do it. Like if Miami were to accomplish one of those things this year, maybe next year you go into it thinking that. I go in every single season. I go in hoping to see improvement, and I go in hoping to see a team that is at least relevant, competing for a championship within their own conference. Miami has not really been that since 2017. Right? I mean, last year after Miami had, what was it, a 4-0 start and the domination of Texas A&M last year, I felt really good heading into ACC play. Then they lose their first ACC game against Georgia Tech, and, your expectations were put in the blender, right? So just go into every season cautiously optimistic that Miami's going to be better than they were last year and that they're going to try to compete to be relevant within the ACC. I would adjust your expectations that way. Because again, the whole thing, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. We've been fooled like 15 times. So go into the season hoping it's going to be better. And then if they accomplish something this year, next year, maybe you go in with more realistic And I'm not telling you shouldn't expect Miami to be good. I'm just telling you, adjust your expectations. That way you don't get completely tortured the way that we have in recent years. Let's see. We get a question from our guy, Trelvis, who says, how much does Mario need to win before he moves into the created program position and allows someone else to coach? Now, I don't know, like Trelvis, are you saying you want Mario to to step out of coaching and become take over for Alonzo Highsmith? Do you want that? Or are you asking, at what point does he become like Barry Alvarez at Wisconsin, where he steps off and becomes the AD there? I mean, he's entering year 3 of a 10-year contract to coach the team. I'm not expecting him to ride off into some administrative role anytime soon, man. And I hope that doesn't happen anytime soon, because guess what? if Mario Cristobal builds a championship caliber team or a championship contender, he will not feel any need to stop coaching day to day. So, we all just have to hope he continues to adapt as a game day coach, evolve, keep recruiting the way he's recruiting. And, I think, again, I already drew the comparison earlier. If Cristobal can do for Miami, what Butch Davis did for Miami in the mid and late 90s and build that type of a powerhouse roster, then we're all going to be in really good shape for years to come. And listen, folks, that's another, going back to the previous question, that's another reason why you should feel, I think, more realistically optimistic about the way things are happening right now, because I haven't seen recruiting like this since before we had like recruiting services, right? I mean, you talk about the type of recruiting that was being done in the 90s. That was before 24/7 and on 3 and all that. Like, it was a lot more of like an inexact measurement in how recruiting was going. When you talk about putting together top 7, top 5 classes consistently, which seems to be what Miami's been doing now in this era, you would think that they're building for something more sustainable right now. So I appreciate the questions. I appreciate the love. And it's going to be a busy week, guys. We're going to continue to kind of preview spring football. Congratulations to the baseball team. As the basketball team is fading, the baseball team, J.D. Arteaga, congratulations to. He's been here for many years, but now he's the skipper for the first time. Hurricanes got that sweep. I know the fourth game was canceled, but they got their wins, their perfect start against NJIT. Baseball team is off to a fantastic start. I couldn't be happier about that. I will see you guys out at the light very soon. And we'll talk to you next time on another episode of Locked On Canes, part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.